It's time for another edition of Lewis at Large, 60 minutes of smart talk radio featuring guests from all walks of life in conversation with your host, Warner Lewis. So sit back and lend us your ears for the next hour. Now here with today's first guest is the host of Lewis at Large, Warner Lewis.
Well, welcome everybody to another edition of Lewis at Large. Yours truly, Warner Lewis, of course, from the flight deck as always, and of course, that means some smart talk radio is in your future. In this segment, an interesting subject indeed. We're going to be talking about a brand new work called Body of Truth, how our science, history, and culture drive our obsession with weight and what we can do about it. The author is Harriet Brown. She's an associate professor of magazine journalism at the S.I. Newhouse School of Public Communication at Syracuse University. She also is the author of a previous work called Brave Girl Eating, A Family Struggle with Anorexia. She's written for the New York Times Magazine, O Magazine, Psychology Today, Prevention, etc., etc. And we are very happy to have her here. Harriet, how are you, my friend?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Thank you for being here. The subject of weight, we have had all kinds of people on here, medical professionals and others, telling us we're too fat, we're out of shape, we're this, we're that, and the only way to cure it is to, of course, do their special diet or do their various things. And again, we're not selling tapes and books here. That's not the idea. You're coming at this from a little bit of a different orientation. Tell us why this obsession with weight is becoming now unhealthy.
Well, I think it's always been unhealthy, but I think it's worse now because it is so relentless. It is coming at us from so many directions, and the sort of ideas of what we should weigh, what we should look like, what our health numbers should be, have never been so punishing as they are now. And so basically a lot of us are being told or feel constantly like we just don't measure up. And I think one of the tragedies of this is that we are focused so heavily on weight, and we use that to stand in for health, that we're actually damaging our health. And there's lots of things. I mean, I wrote this book because, not to be like a big downer, but because I think we can take steps to improve our health that have nothing to do with weight, and we can actually make our lives better.
Would it be, do you agree that physicians and others do owe it to us if we're obese, if we are a society that is getting larger and larger, and there is reasonable medical evidence that if you're too large, it will have a damaging effect on your health? Are they doing us a service by sounding the message or not? Apparently not.
I think they're sounding the wrong message is what I really think. I mean, I think, to be honest, it's not good for you to be very underweight or very fat. I like the word fat rather than overweight or obese, so I'm going to use that word. So no, I hope no one is offended by that. But, there are health risks associated with being at either end of the spectrum. The thing is, we aren't very good at being able to change our weights and our bodies and keeping those changes. So for that reason alone, if nothing else, it makes a lot more sense to focus on health. So, for example, you go to the doctor, and the doctor asks you about what you eat and how much you exercise, and you say, I eat a healthy, balanced diet. I exercise 5 days a week for 45 minutes. I walk to work. I do all this stuff, but my weight still puts me in the BMI category. I think that it would be wrong of the doctor to then, put a lot of pressure on someone to get thinner. Some people are meant to be larger than others. I think it's much more about our behavior, our actions, what we do. If you go to the doctor and say, well, I eat at McDonald's every day and I never do a lick of exercise, then that's cause for alarm no matter what you weigh, no matter what size you are.
You're a professor of journalism at Syracuse University. Why do you care about this? Why is this so extraordinarily personal to you, Harriet?
Well, for one thing, because I'm a woman in America, and I think it's hard to be a woman in America and not have had this affect you personally. So, I've done the lose 20 or 30 pounds probably 5 times in my life, and invariably have had the weight come back on, and invariably have felt really terrible about myself. And I've suffered like we all do, I think, from that struggle and never feeling like I was good enough. So there's that. And then there's also the fact that when my older daughter developed anorexia, I got to look at the whole weight issue from the other side. And some of the things that happened while she was sick really opened my eyes to what a problem this is. Starting with the day she was diagnosed, in the pediatrician's office, we went down to the lab to get an EKG. She took off her shirt, so the tech could put the electrodes on, and, I hadn't actually seen her without her shirt in a while, and it was horrifying, and I was sitting there quietly crying, and the tech said to my daughter, "You're so nice and slim. How do you keep your figure?" And I just thought, oh my gosh, first of all, I would like to strangle this woman, but that was not an isolated experience. So I had the experience of having my daughter be, dangerously emaciated and literally having strangers walk up to her in the street and say, "You're gorgeous, you're so beautiful," praising her totally unhealthy thinness. And that just opened my eyes very wide to how messed up we all are around issues of weight. I mean, someone who could have literally died at any moment is being praised for being beautiful and for being the right weight. Something is wrong.
What about, and again, you touched on this briefly and implied it at least, what about the media? And again, yes, your book is part of that media, those media voices, but the electronic media, online and such, is it continuing to send wrong messages?
Well, I think the mainstream media is definitely still stuck in this, cycle of you have to be better, you have to be thinner, you have to be more perfect. I mean, if you think about advertising and marketing are all predicated on the idea that you're not okay the way you are. So you have to feel insecure or anxious about yourself so we can sell you something, right? Without that, there would be no advertising industry. So there's that element, and then there's, we get that message just coming at us constantly. The great thing about media is that it has the potential to give other kinds of messages too. And I think we're seeing right now on social media in particular, like on Tumblr, is a platform where a lot more people are starting to say, hey, wait a minute, there's another way to think about this, there's another way to feel about your body, there's another way to construe health. So, I think media is just a tool. It all depends what we do with it.
How are you, again, what about we've been talking about young women. Let's talk about males as well. Tell us about the self-image there and how that might be a little bit different perspective.
Historically, men have not been as vulnerable to messages around their appearance because in this culture we put a lot less emphasis on appearance as a sort of measure of, a guy's worth. I mean, it doesn't matter. You can be Hillary Clinton. You can be, married to the leader of the free world. You can be whatever, but you're still going to get snarky comments about your cankles. You know what I mean? It's like there's this sense that you're nothing if your appearance doesn't measure up if you're a woman. That hasn't historically been the case for men. Now we're starting to see a little bit more body emphasis for men, but it does take a different form, as you suggest. So for women, it's all about being thin. For men, it tends to be pressure to be buff, to be jacked, to be muscular in a certain way.
Again, if you just joined us, yours truly, Warner Lewis from the flight deck of Lewis at Large Radio. We're talking to Harriet Brown. She is an associate professor of magazine journalism at the SI Newhouse School of Public Communication at Syracuse. She's also the award-winning author of Brave Girl Eating, A Family Struggle with Anorexia. She's also written for the New York Times and many others. Brand new work called Body of Truth. It is all about how science, history, and culture drive our obsession with weight and what we can do about it. Harriet, there are those screaming that we're overweight or underweight, and then there are those yelling back, stop obsessing about this. You're part of that chorus. Tell us, where's the balance there? And by guess what I mean is, what do we need to be teaching? And again, to our children, so to speak, I guess would where we would start. What do we need to be teaching them then?
I think it's a really good question, right? Because it's not just about pointing out problems, it's about saying, well, how do we go forward from here? And I think that what we need to be teaching kids and young people is that, first of all, bodies come in all shapes and sizes. So there's not just one idea of how we should all look or what size we should all be. And I think number two is we should be teaching, instead of like threatening and punishing and, punishing people. What I mean by that is like, there's a lot of stigma and discrimination around being fat in this culture. So I think a better approach is to say, hey, what makes you feel good? Everyone has to sort of figure this out for themselves. On some level, health is pretty individual. So I know if I eat a lot of sugar, I get sleepy. I don't feel so good. So I tend to not eat too much sugar, not because someone's telling me not to, but because I'm listening to my body's own internal cues. And I think when we are so prescriptive in this culture about what you should eat, eat this, don't eat that, do this, don't do that, then what happens is we, people, lose touch with our own internal sense of what makes us feel good, and then I think we're just lost. So what I would say is, move your body, because we know that's good for everybody. We know that improves everybody's health. It's not necessarily going to make you thin, and that's totally fine, but find some activity to do that's joyful, and do it a few times a week, or do it when it feels good to you. Eat a lot of different things. Eat well. Pay attention to how you feel when you eat. All of these things, I think, get enough sleep. That's another thing. So I think we could do a lot to promote health that has nothing to do with weight.
What about, and again, when you're talking about weight, it's age old. Are we too large? Are we too small? Are we eating right? Et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. Do you feel hopeful to the future, or are we sort of a lost cause here? And let me layer on top of that, in terms of how we look at our own bodies and the obsession with weight or not, are we more obsessed with it, in your opinion, in Western culture than we are around the world in other spots?
Well, I think the U.S., I'll start with your last question. I think in the U.S. we are more obsessed, although certainly other cultures and other countries share that. But I think we have an interesting confluence of factors here. Our country was founded by Puritans, and I think somewhere in our national consciousness we still have this fondness for seeing things in a very black and white way, which I think, people in other cultures don't necessarily do that. So here we especially have this kind of moral layer to the whole issue. Like, how many times do people say, oh, I ate that chocolate cake, I'm so bad, or, I only ate salad today, I'm so good, or I went to the gym for 16 hours in a row, I'm so good, So we have this sort of moral overlay, and I think that is particularly American. In terms of, you asked about like whether we're a lost cause. I mean, if you're asking that like in terms of obesity, we're not continuing to get fatter. By the way, there's solid evidence that says we Americans did gain weight between about 1980 and 2000, and that has pretty much stopped. And in some parts of the demographic, it is going in the other direction a little bit. I think the bigger question is, can we find ways to promote health that don't have anything to do with weight? Really, we don't actually know why we are heavier now. We have some ideas, and some of those ideas might include food marketing. They might include increased screen time. They also include exposure to chemicals. There's a growing body of evidence to suggest that being exposed to certain kinds of plastics and endocrine disruptors change our metabolisms. There's all sorts of reasons, but the bottom line is I think if we can shift the conversation just a little bit away from this sort of relentless emphasis on weight and more toward promoting health, then I think we have every reason in the world to be hopeful.
What about, we cannot have a conversation, a body of truth, again, is the name of the work, and it's obsession with weight. We have to talk about, briefly here, touch on anorexia, bulimia, however you want to refer to it. Talk to us about, and again, we're stereotyping here a little bit, but primarily young ladies, but we're happy to talk about young men as well. Talk to us about that condition. Talk to us, how does that play into this whole thing?
Well, eating disorders, and they do affect more women than men, especially anorexia, but they do affect people from all different cultural and racial and ethnic backgrounds. And they are biological illnesses, which means we know, for example, that what makes you really susceptible to developing anorexia is having a family history of any eating disorders or anxiety disorders. So we know there's a strong biological component. And I think, if you look back in the literature, those diseases have been with us for a long time, but they haven't always been framed as being about weight and appearance. So, like, for example, in the Middle Ages, you get a lot of narratives that are about people talking about behaviors that are totally eating disorder behaviors, but instead of talking about wanting to be thin, they talk about wanting to be holy, wanting to be closer to God, because those were the things that culture valued. So I think to the extent that our culture puts so much emphasis on being thin and looking a certain way, if you're vulnerable, if you have this sort of biological vulnerability, that can be very triggering. But I want to be clear that eating disorders are not caused by the media. It's just sort of, they can be triggered. But on the other hand, right, there's a lot of people in this country who don't have actual eating disorders, but we're still pretty messed up, about what are we supposed to eat? Are we eating too much? We have disordered eating, and we have, a disordered relationship with our bodies and with physical exercise. And that, I think, is definitely grows totally out of this obsession that we have with weight. And that's another good reason that we need to sort of break this cycle.
What about, and again, going forward, again, if you were sort of to wave a wand for America's public school systems, and again, I'm sort of focusing on school, just trying to catch some of this attitudinal development early. Let's just say seniors in high school on down. What do we need to do? What's the message that needs to get out there? And because I believe, editorializing here, we do need to talk about what keeps you healthy, food and otherwise, but on the other hand, balancing it.
I'm so glad you asked that question, because there's a lot of stuff that's happening in the schools and with, kids these days that's very well intentioned and very damaging. So I would say, number one, encouraging kids to be physically active, not because it's going to make them thin, but because it's fun and kids are meant to sort of move around. Getting rid of those BMI report cards that I know a lot of states send those home, and in a lot of states, pediatricians are required to report a patient's BMI, kids' BMIs, to some state agency. BMI is a worthless measure. It tells us nothing about someone's health. It's just a ratio between height and weight, pretty much end of story. So, and I know that, like, for example, my own daughter, one of the things that triggered her eating disorder was a class, a 6th grade health and wellness class, and I'm putting that in quotes, where she came home one day and announced, in class we learned that it's bad to eat sweets. I'm never eating sweets again. Now, that didn't cause her eating disorder, but it's a very black and white view of, what you're supposed to eat, what you're not supposed to eat. And I don't think that's doing our kids any good at all. I think it's kind of, the analogy is with kids who are never touch a drop of alcohol, and then they go to college and they go crazy, because they don't know how to handle it. We have to teach our kids how to be comfortable in their own skins, and we have to teach them that it's okay if you don't look like Jennifer Lawrence or Twiggy or, fill in the blank, that people can be beautiful and healthy at many different sizes and shapes. One of the saddest stories I ever heard was told to me by a researcher in this field who said, she talked with a 16-year-old, so a kid in high school, who said to her on the phone, well, my school is having this big campaign to prevent childhood obesity, and there's all these signs up all over school with pictures of people who look just like me and big arrows through them. And this girl was crying, and that is not helping anyone, that sort of stigma and that sort of black and white thinking.
As a professor, you see male students, you see female students, and you see, in theory, some of the best and the brightest. And yet you probably see obsession with weight and obsession, as you say, with being buff from the males. Are the college kids getting it? Or are they still really obsessed, whether it's being thin or not, certainly making sure they're not overweight?
Oh, it's a huge obsession, certainly on my campus and certainly on, I think, most campuses. It's, and I often think of, I grew up in the 60s and 70s and certainly felt pressure to look a certain way, but I think it's 1,000 times harder now on young people because not only do they get it from, friends and family and doctors and whatever, but they get it coming at them all the time from media and social media. All of that gets reinforced endlessly. So, yeah, that's another reason why not only am I writing about this, but I created a class that I teach here on body diversity in the media, specifically because I was watching my students struggle with this and just was so frustrated at the amount of misconceptions that they had about it.
Well, the work is called, again, Body of Truth, How Science, History, and Culture Drive Our Obsession with Weight and What We Can Do About It, written by Harriet Brown. She is an associate professor of journalism at Syracuse University and author of a previous work as well called Brave Girl Eating. The work is published by Da Capo Press, Lifelong Books. Harriet, how can people find out more about this subject, your point of view, and also get a copy of the book?
They can get a copy of the book in any bookstore or on Amazon or on IndieBound or, at your favorite book buying location. And I have a website that's just harrietbrown.com that has lots of information on there, and I encourage people to write to me.
Well, listen, thank you so much for spending time with us today. Good luck with college kids and all those interesting challenges indeed. And thank you again so much for being on with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. We will be back with more right after this on Lewis at Large.